Your grandfather worked for 45 years and died with $4,118 in his checking account. 6 months later, his son, your uncle, died and left behind $1.2 million nobody knew about. Not his wife, not his kids, not your own father, who'd known him his whole life. Everyone at both funerals thought they could tell who'd won and who'd lost just by looking at the car in the driveway. They couldn't. You went to both funerals. Same black suit, 6 months apart, same folding chairs that squeak the same way. Only one of those two men ever taught you how to build wealth, but it took looking at both of them to understand how a life is actually measured. Your grandfather worked the line at a manufacturing plant for 45 years. He showed up at 6 a.m. for 4.5 decades, missed maybe 9 sick days in his life, got a pin and a handshake at retirement, and called it a good run. He raised 2 kids, your father and your uncle, on that paycheck, and never once talked about money in front of you. Not because it was rude, because there wasn't much to discuss. He gave the world everything his hands could produce, and the world gave him just enough to get by. At the funeral, your father's sister is going through his bank statements at the kitchen table, because somebody has to. $4,118. That was it. After a pension that mostly covered rent on a 1-bedroom near the plant he used to walk to, that was the final balance. He worked every day he was able, and the number at the end of it couldn't have covered his own funeral if the family hadn't split it.
Nobody says this out loud. Everybody just gets quieter when the will comes up, because there isn't one. There is just a checking account and a recliner nobody wants. You're 24 at this funeral. You make $43,000 a year at a job you don't love. You watch your aunt close the bank statement and put it away like it's private, even though everyone already assumes what it is. 45 years of discipline and a number that small isn't a secret. It's just a reality that nobody wants to point at. It wasn't a failure of character. It was just the crushing math of an ordinary life without leverage. You drive home that night and sit in the driveway with the engine off longer than you mean to, doing math you've never done before. 45 years of doing everything right, and the number at the end of it was smaller than what you make in a single year at 24, having barely started. You don't know yet that in 6 months you'll be back in this same kitchen, and the math is going to be the opposite kind of confusing. Your uncle worked at an insurance office his whole career, the kind of job people forget exists between hearing about it and picturing it. He drove a Buick that was 11 years old when he died. He wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation for as long as you could remember. At dinners, he asked everyone else about their lives, and rarely mentioned his own. Not hiding anything, it seemed. He just never thought his Tuesdays were worth reporting. He dies of a heart attack in March. Sudden, no warning, a half-finished crossword left on the counter. The funeral is smaller than your grandfather's. Just family, a few guys from the office, his wife standing near the front, not quite steady. 3 weeks later, the lawyer calls a meeting. His widow sits at that same kitchen table. The lawyer says estate, and everyone assumes it means the house and maybe some modest savings, the way it usually does for a man who drove an 11-year-old Buick. $1.2 million. Brokerage accounts going back decades. A pension he never touched early. Automatic transfers running since he was 26. Quietly. The same amount every month. Raised slightly every few years. Never explained to anyone. Not even his wife. She sits with her hand flat on the table for a long moment before she finally says it. He never said anything. 30 years of marriage and he never said anything. Not bragging, not confessing, not even hinting on a bad month that there was a massive cushion underneath everything. He just kept the sweaters in rotation and the Buick running and let everyone, including the people closest to him, believe his life was exactly as small as it looked. You're 24 and a half now, sitting in that same kitchen, and you feel something shift you don't have words for yet. 2 men, same family, roughly the same modest life from the outside, same 40-hour weeks, same unremarkable car in the same driveway. One left $4,118. One left $1.2 million. The difference was never the size of the paycheck. It was a single decision made decades earlier, repeated automatically, and never mentioned again. You go home that week and open a brokerage account for the first time, not because you suddenly understand the complexities of investing, because you finally understand that looking modest and being broke aren't the same condition, and neither is looking modest and being a millionaire. You set a transfer for $180 a payday, automatic, the same week as the second funeral. You tell no one, not your parents, not your aunt, not the cousin who keeps asking what you're going to do with your life. You don't have an answer that fits at a dinner table. You have a transfer confirmation on your phone that you close out and never mention again. You're 29 at a cousin's wedding, string lights overhead, a drink sweating in your hand between songs. Someone brings up your uncle, half a joke, half a wound. Imagine never telling your own wife. A few people laugh, uncomfortable. You set your drink down and don't laugh. You think about the fact that you haven't told anyone either, and how that fact would land very differently in this room if they knew it about you instead of him.
You're 34, dropping off a spare set of house keys for your cousin who works the line at your grandfather's old plant. You wait for him in the break room during a shift change, the same room where your grandfather drank black coffee out of a thermos for 45 years. The room hasn't changed. The notification comes in while you're leaning against the same counter where men have leaned for 50 years. You look at it for 3 seconds. $190,000. You put the phone away. You ask your cousin how the new line supervisor is working out. You're 41 when your uncle's widow calls you out of nowhere on a Thursday. Nearly 2 decades have passed since the lawyer sat at her table. The wealth management firm sends her thick packets of statements every month, but the cold corporate charts leave her feeling isolated and exhausted by the guesswork. She remembers something you mentioned once at a family barbecue, some offhand comment about retirement accounts. She wants to know what the numbers actually mean, because nobody else in the family has ever asked her a real question about it. You spend 2 hours on the phone walking her through the paperwork, translating the mutual fund yields and asset allocations into plain English. At the end, she says, quiet, "I wish I'd asked him while he was here. I wish he'd let me ask."
You don't tell her your own number that day. You think about it. You decide it isn't the moment. But for the first time, the romantic myth of your uncle's silence starts to crack. You realize that keeping $1 million a secret from your life partner isn't just modesty. It's a profound withholding of intimacy. The silence that protected him from the world also built a wall against the people who loved him. You look at your phone after she hangs up, wondering if you've inherited his safety or his loneliness. You're 46 when your portfolio crosses $740,000, not from anything dramatic, just years of not stopping, through markets that went both ways, more than once. It happens on a random Tuesday, a number on a screen while you're waiting for the dryer to finish. The buzzer goes off right as you close the phone, and for a second, the loudest thing in the room is a machine, not the number. You think about the recliner nobody wanted, and the sweaters in rotation, and how 2 different silences produce 2 completely different endings. There's a third funeral now, your father's, the year you turn 50. The same brother who stood beside your uncle's widow at that kitchen table all those years ago is gone too, and the family thins out the way families do.
At the reception, your nephew, 24, the exact age you were at the first funeral, asks what you actually do for work, the way young relatives ask when they don't know what else to say. You tell him, plainly, your ordinary job title, nothing more. He nods, satisfied, and moves on to the food table. He completely assumes he knows everything there is to know about your life, based on the faded sedan you drove into the church parking lot. You don't tell him about the number.
You think for a second about your uncle's 3 sweaters, and you understand something you didn't have words for at 24. The silence was never about secrecy for its own sake. It was about refusing to let a number become the thing people saw before they saw you. You drive home from your father's funeral in that same faded sedan. You pass a dealership lit up under its lot lights, the kind of place that sells the version of success everyone recognizes on sight. You don't slow down. Somewhere right now, a 24-year-old is standing in a kitchen while someone closes a thin bank statement and puts it back in a drawer, assuming they already know exactly what kind of life that number represents. They don't know yet that the real lesson isn't 6 months away at a second funeral. It's 30 years away, in a kitchen they haven't stood in yet, with a number nobody will see coming, and the wisdom to know what to do with the silence.